The gentle hum of the airport terminal was a familiar background to most, but to 16-year-old Janelle Rivers, it was the sound of possibility. She sat silently in seat 3B of the first-class cabin, fingers curled around the straps of her worn canvas backpack. It was the same backpack she had carried for years through classes, science fairs, and long evenings at the public library. Today, it sat at her feet like a loyal companion on what was to be the most important journey of her young life, her first solo flight. The early morning sun splashed across the smooth interior of the cabin, casting soft light over her brown cheeks. She looked out the window, watching as the tarmac bustled below. Her ticket purchased by her godmother, Dr. Lenora Fields, was not just a generous gift. It was a statement. Dr. Fields was a high-ranking official with the Federal Aviation Administration, and more than that, she was Janelle's greatest advocate. After Janelle placed first in a state science competition, Lenora surprised her with the flight to attend a youth summit for gifted students in San Francisco. Everything about that morning felt monumental until the footsteps arrived. The sharp click of heels snapped through the peaceful hush of the cabin. The head flight attendant, a woman named Deborah Langston, strode down the aisle. Her uniform was crisp, makeup flawless, her presence commanding. She scanned the passengers, her gaze settling on Janelle. Her expression shifted just slightly, and she saw the teenager's hoodie, worn sneakers, and skin tone. Deborah approached seat 3B with a forced smile, her voice amplified just enough for other passengers to hear. "Excuse me, young lady. This is first class." Janelle looked up, startled but calm. "Yes, ma'am. My ticket says 3B. She reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out her boarding pass, extending it toward the woman. Deborah barely glanced at it. "I think there's been a mistake. You need to move to the back." The murmurs began. Some passengers peeked over their newspapers. Others glanced up from their phones. No one said anything. Janelle's voice remained quiet but firm. "I'm supposed to be here. My godmother booked this for me." "I'm going to have to ask you to move," Deborah snapped, her patience wearing thin. She didn't verify the pass, didn't check the list, didn't consult anyone. She simply pointed toward economy and said, "Take your things. You're delaying the boarding process." The silence around them grew heavier. Janelle stood slowly, the backpack sliding over her shoulder. Her eyes stayed on the ground as she made her way to the back, past the stairs, past the whispers. She sat down in the second-to-last row of economy, her hands trembling slightly. Her seemed a woman buried in a travel magazine didn't look up. The humiliation was suffocating. But Janelle didn't cry. She pulled out her phone, tapped out a message to Dr. Fields, and hit send. "They made me leave my seat. Said I didn't belong in first class. Showed them my ticket. They didn't check." What Janelle didn't know couldn't have known was that Dr. Lenora Fields was in the middle of an FAA safety board meeting in Washington, D.C. when she received that message. The room around her blurred. The walls seemed to tilt. She excused herself without a word. Lenora's hands trembled only once as she made the call to the operations command line at FAA headquarters. Her voice was calm, measured, and cold. "This is Dr. Lenora Fields. I need an immediate hold placed on Atlantic Skies Flight 607 departing Dallas-Fort Worth. There has been a discriminatory incident involving a minor with a valid first-class ticket." Within minutes, the flight's departure was delayed. The captain received a directive from FAA enforcement. Taxiing was halted. Federal compliance officers were dispatched. Back in economy, Janelle looked out the window. She hadn't expected a reply from her godmother so quickly. The message read, "Stay seated. Don't say a word. I'm handling it." The flight crew was visibly shaken. Deborah returned to the front galley, sipping water and trying to ignore the churning in her stomach. She didn't know what was happening yet, but she could feel it. The kind of dread that coils in your chest when the storm isn't on the horizon, it's already here. Captain Bill Marcus stood outside the cockpit, flipping through a communication printout. He tapped his headset and whispered to his first officer. "FAA wants a full report before takeoff. Something about a passenger being removed from their seat." "A minor?" "Who?" the first officer asked. Marcus scrolled through the manifest. "Janelle Rivers, 16. 3B. Looks like the seat was reassigned without verification." His face hardened. He didn't ask why. He already knew. In the galley, a younger flight attendant named David Nguyen approached Deborah. "She had the ticket," he said quietly. "I saw it." Deborah didn't look at him. "There are procedures, David." "No," he said a little louder. "There weren't." Minutes later, the door to the plane reopened. 2 FAA officers boarded, one in a sharp navy blue uniform, the other in a gray suit with a federal badge clipped to his belt. They didn't speak to the passengers. They didn't need to. "Ms. Langston," the officer said, "please step into the galley." Deborah followed them silently. The interview was brief and damning. "You failed to verify the ticket," Officer Rhodes said. "You singled out a minor based on appearance. There was no technical error. No procedural justification. You're being relieved of duty, effective immediately." As she was escorted from the plane, the whispers turned into stares. Not one of support. Not one of pity. Just recognition finally. Janelle watched quietly from the back. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just waited. A few moments later, another flight attendant David approached her. "Miss Rivers," he said, kneeling down so their eyes met. "You're welcome to return to seat 3B now. And I'm sorry. For everything." She nodded, said nothing. The walk back to first class was different this time. No one dared meet her eyes. Not the man who had smirked when she was removed. Not the woman who had whispered she must have made a mistake. Their silence, once a weapon, now seemed like shame. She sat back down in 3B, reached into her bag, pulled out her book, and opened it to the same page she'd left behind. Hours later, the story of Flight 607 made headlines. Teen removed from first-class seat sparks FAA investigation. Bias in the skies, how one girl grounded a flight. Rivers clause introduced in new federal aviation guidelines. Janelle declined every interview, every request for a photo. She didn't want fame. She just wanted respect. A month later, a new FAA policy was passed. All boarding disputes involving minors must be independently verified. No passenger may be relocated without ticket confirmation. Training in bias awareness is mandatory for all flight crews. In the aviation industry, it became known quietly but permanently as the Rivers Clause. At a symposium in Atlanta, DR, Fields gave a speech. She didn't raise her voice, she said. She didn't threaten a lawsuit. She just stayed seated in the truth. And that was enough to change the way we fly. Janelle Rivers went back to school, kept her head down, got accepted into Stanford. She never talked much about that flight. But whenever she passed through an airport and looked at the seat map while boarding, she always smiled softly when she saw seat 3B. Because now it would always belong to someone who belonged there. And no one could tell her otherwise.